Welcome back to the Unwounded Womb, and today I have the great pleasure of being joined by a wise woman already and in the making, who also happens to be my wife. So before we get started, how about you, as much as I hate to admit it, you are more than my wife.
I am.
You do things other than just be married to me, don't you?
Yes, I do. Yes.
How about so that people can understand? It's like, okay, why did you get your wife on this thing? It's like, well, there's a lot of good reasons why on a session about the unwounded womb and women's work and needing to make sure that women's voices are heard inside this block of material, why I would bring you along. Not just because you have a vagina, but because you're deeply engaged in women's work and have been in different ways your whole life.
Yes.
And so perhaps just as a little backdrop so that they know who this person is beyond she happens to be in his life. Tell us a little bit about your women's work. Like, what's your journey? Like, how do you describe this aspect, this facet of what you do?
Yes. Well, I would like to start with maybe introducing myself. My name is Maya. And yes, I am Jimmy's wife. And as you can imagine, if you follow Jimmy for a while, you would expect that he would have to have maybe a powerful woman by his side. So somebody needs to regulate him.
And patient woman.
Yes. And yes, so I have been involved with the women work for a very long time, and maybe more so in the last, since my early 40s, or since I turned 40. That has been a very, very powerful journey. When I went more into, studying, it started very simple, like I started studying ceremonies and rituals, but those things were because I was interested in those things and I wanted to do it really well. And yeah, being in the 40s obviously brings me to a very different journey. So, going from different women's circles, learning about our cycles, learning about menstruation, learning about power of menstruation in my early 20s, trying to work with it. And now coming to the more riper age and understanding of my own womb, of my moon cycle, of the moon herself, and into the mysteries that are bigger than me and us, and how that can complement and balance my marriage, for example.
Yes. Yeah, great. So one thing that I would try and add some detail to is that you mentioned briefly is that you're involved in rites of passage.
Yes.
And so since one of the central things that we're going to be talking about today is really the rite of passage of peri-menopause and menopause, then just to put that in context is some of the rites of passage that you have not just been through in your life, like you've been through the rites of passage of menarche and starting menstruation and of childbirth and all these things, your individual ones. But on top of that, you have been a space holder to assist people in the rites of passage of their conscious divorce, or their marriage, or their vision quest, or a range of different things. You've held space for rites of passage, and you've been studying in an apprenticeship for some years about the technologies around this in a specific lineage, right?
Yep.
And that you're really, really focused on rituals and rites of passage, the myths that are behind them, the stories that are behind them. But for me to articulate why do I think your voice is really important here is, one, because you're living through this particular chapter of peri-menopause that we're speaking about. So it's really good. There's a case study, right?
Yes.
But two, you're engaged in rites and you see the ceremony of everyday life, right? And the framing of our conversation today around menopause is really going to be on that sense of it as a rite of passage. and with all of your backdrop in seeing sacred fire ceremonies or sweat lodge ceremonies or this ceremonies or divorce ceremonies and all these different rites of young girls and boys and everything like that, then I want to bring that voice to your personal experience of this rite of passage, of passing through this chapter of life, and then also then your insight as someone that works with others and has watched the world as well. So that's my part that I'd like to add in why I think your voice is really relevant here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Well, I guess just a small thing I would, add to just at the beginning, like I can see at this point of my life, because I am 46, and I can see that perimenopause is definitely present. But what that means and what I hear from other people, from other women, is that, now is the time when we have to deal with everything what we haven't dealt before in our lives. And this can come in many ways. And so, sometimes and this is just my new thing when I went to see my therapist a couple of weeks ago, and we spoke about anger and the sacred anger that we also hold as a women. And what does it mean? And how do we channel it in a positive way so it doesn't just come as a burning, which we do want to often do, is my experience, through that being premenstrual or being menopausal and stuff. But how do we not burn the world around us? But how do we harvest this sacred fire, and it can be of anger, and channel it in a different way, and channel it to our own betterments in some ways. So I can see, and I could see it for many years now, there is two ways. I've got two strong choices in here. I can either admit or accept that I am at the beginning of a very new chapter, like being in a puberty, I'm in a menopause, and I can become the wise woman, or I will hold on to my old patterns and everything that I have learned in my life, and I will calcify it and be stagnant and become grumpy old woman. I've got those choices right now. I can feel them, and I can use everything what is happening for those changes.
Yeah, beautiful. So let's get real mythic on this as well. And so there is just running with those things you said. On the one hand, there's all of the dark side and the judgment and the cultural baggage about what menopause is, and the possibility of it is what I heard you just say, of just becoming a withered up old hag. You're an old hag, and you're withered and bitter and nasty and dangerous. It's like a witch, right? It's a bad version, right? Or where that word comes from, as I mentioned previously on this, is the hag-tess. And the hag-tess is the hedge rider, the wise woman, the woman that's in between worlds. It's the witch, but there's no hagginess about it. It doesn't matter how old she is. It means edge dweller, liminal, on the hedge between the village and the big dark forest, right? And so if I introduce some of that language there of and it goes through all of our conversation like this. It's like, on the one hand, there's a great reclamation of the word crone, maiden, mother, crone, respect. On the other hand, there's still a lot of baggage around the old crone, it sort of can still feel like in a youth-based culture that it's still got that used up, haggy, empty, kind of dried, withered, lost your juice kind of possibility, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know.
But there's all those judgments and fears. Like, women have those fears, and there's all this cultural baggage around all this sort of stuff of oh yes, the value in the feminine is in the maiden and in the mother, and then she's done. Once she's done all that, and there's no value, and then she's just a old hag, and she's probably a pain in the ass, a grumpy old hag, right? So I'm dangerously and boldly running towards those misogynist, awful
you are
things, right? And in the same way that I think it's important to run towards the, you know, the shadow king or the dark masculine alongside the benevolent king, you know, and the positive patriarch, of like to see these. What I'm trying to tease out here is actually the honoring of what the opportunity is there, and to bring that back to your sense as well of like, oh, I could become, what was your language? Like a bitter or grumpy old woman, or a bitter old woman?
Grumpy old woman.
Yeah. And I've just mythologized that and said the hag in the negative sense.
Yes.
Or you could become a hag-tess.
Yeah.
And the world desperately needs hag-tesses.
Yes. Well, you know, just also not to take away the power away from the grumpy old women, because there is a power to it, you know, and that's exactly the anger, or you know, what lots of women after menopause are saying is like, oh, I just don't give a shit anymore. Like, I just want to, like, I'm going to speak whatever I want to speak. And then, you know, without upsetting, I guess, anybody. And because I do have lots of friends now that went through the menopause,
Yes.
you know, lots of my mentors are like, you know, in their 60s or 70s. So I work with the older women.
Yes.
And sometimes I also just go like, are you just grumpy old women right now, or are you teaching me? And they do both.
Yes. Well, that's I was hoping you were going to say that, because we're going to talk about Baba Yaga, right? And is Baba Yaga a grumpy old hag, or is she a wise woman? The answer is yes, right? And
very grumpy.
Yeah, and so and absolutely, I'm so glad that you immediately went to the next step of honoring the value of that voice that is also disparaged in a binary way of like good and bad.
Yeah.
It's like good, she dispenses wisdom. Bad, she says things that we don't want to hear.
Or she says it in a way we don't want to hear it.
Doesn't have cotton wool around
She
it.
doesn't have the cotton wool anymore. No,
Yes.
No, she just goes, and she can sometimes catch you, you know, and that is why, you know, working with a hag is its own rites of passage. And it is very different than working with a mother who will just, you know, nourish you and give you everything and make sure that you are okay. Hag just doesn't do that.
Yes.
She will just go like, oh, this is bad. Smash, you know, slash you with a knife so you bleed, and you just go like, that really hurts. And she's like, yeah, whatever. Like,
now you're better.
Now you're better.
Yes.
No, but she's not going to, you know, the only thing is like, she needs to know, and that's where the hag is at her power, when she knows when and how to cut.
Yes. Okay. So good. So I feel like we've really leapt into a beautiful vision of the integration of those two split poles, you know, which need to coexist, right, inside us. But I'd like to wind it back for a moment and be like, ask about like at a non-mythic level about your own struggles to find the balance with those things. Like, do you like noticing the pull towards something that feel like, you know, like how can you speak about some of the challenges of that at a personal level, now that we've established that kind of mythic goal of the hag is not just the sweet old loving grandma with her scones or scones. She's works with buffalo with bufotoxin, with toads and poisonous herbs, and she may cut you and she may get a ward off you, but with a brand that burns, you know. She may tell you to go into the forest where you may die. In fact, you're likely to die, and she'll give you a hard thing to do, you know. So we've got some of that mythic stuff, which we'll come back to. Let's bring it back to the challenge of being at the crossroads here, because you're not a hag, you're not a hag-tess, you're not a crone. You're at the end of Demeter's journey as the mother in some ways. You're still mothering. You've got 15-year-old daughter and a 17-year-old son. But you're at that crossroads of these things. What are the challenges? Like, what do you find to be particularly challenging around that?
Yeah. Well, I think we are having this conversation now because I feel I am in those challenges, but I crossed some very important, thresholds of making those decisions for me. And apart from working on a mythological level, and you're working with Baba Yaga and working with Demeter and just different stories, and I love working with stories, and I lead other people to work with those stories. I think the last 2 years for me were particularly challenging, and not necessarily because of my physical symptoms. I mean, they are part of that, but I live with Dr. Jimmy, I can get lots of herbs, I can get better, like that's okay. But then there are other deeper parts that need to be worked with. So for me, like, because I like working with archetypal, with the stories, so there were two really major things that I worked with in the last 2 years. And one was I would call it the archetype of victim. And the other one is archetype of the shadow mother, or what is it called? Matriarch, shadow matriarch.
Shadow matriarch. Can you just tell us a little bit of, like, let's start with the victim, or we'll start with one of them and tell us what that means, and do you, I mean, this is obviously personal, but it feels like, to me, that those are themes that are likely to come up for a range of women through their perimenopause and menopause as well, is what I assume. So let's see if we can tie them together here. What's your journey with the victim?
Yeah, and that's what I mean, just like the stuff what we haven't dealt with over the years. And there is a time for everything. So it's not just like, oh, I haven't done my work until now, because I've been constantly doing my work. So I never felt I was just, flopping around, on a meadows, unless I was, of course, meant to be just dancing on the meadows, and that's perfectly fine, in the maiden years. But because the part of the menopause or perimenopause brings us, as I was saying, at a puberty, or the end of the other side of the puberty, when the life is changing and we are making huge decisions about our lives. And we all feel that, all women feel that, do I want to still mother the way I am doing? Do I want to stay with my partner? And do I like my job? What am I doing with my life? And because these things do come up, and there's, for me, because the challenges did come up in my marriage, and I can just see, well, is it his fault? Yes, like, and one part of me which just goes like, absolutely, it's his fault. I would be so much better off, like leaving. And then because I did so much work, I also will have to listen to my little, voices inside of me, just like, and what if it wasn't his fault? What is my part in this? And then somewhere along the way, I think I just find like this is a victim voice in me that is speaking right now. And the victim voice, because the victim voice is always right when it's there. Like, yes, it's their fault, and sorry me, and they really hurt me, and this is what's happening. But I think then, because I was very willing to look at a victim, and it was extremely unpleasant, but the more I looked at it, the more I saw it's everywhere in my life. It's actually going deeper and deeper, and in some ways it felt like a parasite or a cancer, or like, going, but not through my body, but through different personalities of mine, and then different relationships I'm having, not only with my partner, but also with my friends and with myself mostly. And working with a victim was just grueling, unpleasant, beautiful, rewarding journey. And I still work with it, but I can see that I just shining the light on a victim just makes such a big change, because then I feel like it's a healing before I get even sick. So it's prevention, it's preventative medicine.
obviously you're here because there's only so much that I don't have lived experience of having a womb, you know, that's why there's female voices here. But when I hear you speak about the victim, and I've been journeying through my andropause, my menopause, my midlife crisis, my own process of dying to my previous version of myself so that I can give birth to the next iteration of myself.
That's exactly what we have in common.
Absolutely. So it's very similar in some ways.
It's very similar.
And it's very unique to the genders in some ways. But something I could really relate to actually in my own piece is that victim mentality, and that obviously that's a challenge for everyone of any gender at any point in their life. But in terms of the transition to eldership, which is really what I think we need to be focused on with menopause, as we should with andropause, is that it's a rite of passage, initiating us from that central position of householder, right? Starting on that position of elder and space holder, right? But to be the bearer of all of that, you can't do it if you are going to be a victim old person, right? And there's plenty of old people that passed through that time that didn't manage to resolve they're in a victim, and they're just a grumpy old man or a grumpy old woman that are just complaining, if I had this and I hadn't done that. Not, you know, respect to our elders, but just that there's no guarantee of initiated adult consciousness, and traditional cultures understand this. It has to be worked out and supported, and only some people really make that leap. And if you had 270-year lifespan, there's no guarantee that you're going to arrive at adulthood after 250 years. There's no guarantees of adult consciousness. This rite of passage has to land, has to work. But one of the pieces around that, I think, is letting go of the victim mentality of I'm a victim, I'm a perpetrator, you're a victim, you're a perpetrator, inside a larger, more nuanced narrative of the tragedy of life that we all participate in. And that the eldership, and I put this to you, and please correct me if this is not how it looks from your perspective with a womb, but that an aspect of eldership has to move beyond the simplistic, okay, you're the victim and you're the perpetrator, into a larger cosmic sense of, well, we're all in here. And that's not cool. Like, he shouldn't have done that, she shouldn't have. Like, you can still comment on appropriate behavior and all that sort of stuff. The larger vision of the tragedy of the human unfolding, that's what I really relate to in terms of when you speak about the victim. And you're saying this is central to you in your menopausal journey, yes?
And I guess why it's, and you know, I didn't get to mention it, but now, you know, it's more clear. Like, I speak also about victimhood because it is essential to my menopausal journey. I have to get rid of my victimhood, of victim mentality, of, you know, being women, or being suppressed, or being oppressed, or you know, all sorts of stuff. And actually, just because if I want to take my power, which I'm doing, I have to let go of the victimhood. There's just no other way around it.
But there's power in victimhood. There's a special weird kind of power that we don't want to relinquish.
There is.
It's a small power, but each one of us sort of wants to hold on to it.
And it's not small, because we can like push people with it and beat them with the sticks. And we can do it very skillfully. And we can also see, I'm just going to speak from the female perspective of the crone. Like, I do know crones where they're just also like beating with a stick, but it is coming from that, not from the wise crone woman, but like from the victimhood kind of stuff. And this is like really essential, you know, to my work. If I want to be a powerful woman, and you know, the powerful woman can be also just misused. Like, so what's the other term I can use? I can be just woman sitting in my own power, just say, in my own center. I need to let go of the victimhood.
You are empowered.
I am empowered, yes. But that's exactly the, you know, because we are just checking the terms, empowerment, left, right, center, and what we actually often, what it looks like just by empowerment is like, oh, be just more assertive and do this, but actually it doesn't often say you have to clean your own vessel first.
Yes.
And because we are, and I would dare to say, as a women, we are privileged. We have the power to cleanse through our wombs, through our bleeding on a monthly cycle.
Yes.
It's a privilege.
It's an opportunity.
It is an opportunity.
Yes.
Like it's the most direct way how we can just gather everything what's happening and what just comes up like so strongly when we are premenstrual, and then just bleed it out. And if you can do this like consciously and well, we are gaining so much. Like we are getting rid of, we could say, like toxins of our body, but of our mind
and your culture
and our culture,
the community. You know.
Yes, that's
bleed for the earth,
and that's the bigger picture. You know what I'm sometimes teaching and at a women's circles, just like how do we bleed well? Like it's actually much bigger piece. You know what we around it. Like how do we bleed well? Like how do we bring that consciousness in? And I'm aware now. Like I'm coming to the end of those cycles. Of like, okay, I can't do this, and I've did it like plenty of years. I'm still bleeding. I still have my bleeding because I recognize the power. But just towards the end of this whole cycle of 20-something years of bleeding, I'm realizing the benefits of it on a very emotional and spiritual levels. And then because I know I'm going to stop bleeding, how can I prepare myself to keep doing my work? And of course I'm transitioning, like I am moving and learning about different things, as I've been speaking, like sitting with the moon or just like gathering different type of energies for me, so then I can be helpful still to my environment and to me, and just to sit in a balanced way is going to be balancing everybody else, right?
Another piece of language that's possibly relevant here is that the victimhood state is very powerful, but it wields power covertly, whereas an empowered state, the Baba Yaga crone state, wields power overt. Doesn't always have to wield power. It's not always about power, but when power is wielded, it's wielded overtly. Whereas the victimhood is a covert use of power as well. And that's its own shadow stuff. It's a passive aggressive or covert wielding of power.
Passive aggressive stuff. But then the power, what I feel, can come also with the cronehood, because we often imagine just like, the grumpy old woman. It can be wielded by compassion.
Yes.
Yes. That's a different piece.
Now, what was the second? You mentioned the victimhood, and then there was the other.
The shadow.
Tell us about that. What's that other piece?
The shadow matriarch.
The shadow matriarch. That was it. Yes. Tell me about the shadow matriarch. So obviously the light matriarch, the positive matriarch, is all these positive things that are all in our awareness and all that sort of stuff. Tell me about the shadow matriarch.
Okay. Yes, the shadow matriarch I'm still working with, so it's a little bit hard for me to take a full step back and talk about it. But because I started learning and working with the shadow patriarch, which is the patriarch that is inside of me. Okay. So that was part of also the victimhood journey. Wow. So it's not like what other men or society are telling me. Yes. It's the patriarch inside of my own head. Yes. Who gives me these advices how a woman should be living, or how the woman should be presenting. But it's not because somebody else is telling me, and it's very easy. And what we do so often, just like, the society is dictating us. Well, who is this society is what I'm asking. Like, who is actually telling you exactly these things, what you then hear and translate, or what I hear and translate of how I should be behaving or not behaving, or what I should be like. And then I realized, well, it is an archetype, and yes, it is somewhere out there, but I embody it, and I listen to this voice and believe it's true. But if I then stop also just projecting on this, just like, men are like this, and men are like suppressing us in our society, and like I'm not going to go into the details, but the step further back or forward is to go into the shadow matriarch, which is then it's the women's voices, which are not the wise women, but again, like it's my inner voices of how I should be or shouldn't be. And, you know, can I be grumpy? Can I not be grumpy? You know, do I need to keep my house clean? How am I a good mother? Why am I not a good mother? You know, and this is because it's a matriarch. She manages the family and the motherhood very strongly. And so when my own voices of how I am a terrible mother or a terrible wife or terrible something else, you know, then I have to really question how true is that and where are those things coming from? And I can also then, you know, if I ask my partner or my children, like, am I really such a terrible mother as I sometimes feel? And they're all just looking at me like, you're an excellent partner, excellent mother. And yet I've got, you know, the voices in a background. And I feel like if I let them run, they will make me more bitter, never satisfied, and they will hold me back. And if they hold me back, then I will turn into a grumpy old woman. I will become the shadow matriarch who is never happy with anybody, who is happy to criticize everybody. Do I want to become one of those?
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So let's zoom out for a moment. We're looking at menopause as a rite of passage here, right? And in addition to all of the hormonal things and stuff we've spoken about in other lectures in this series, then what we're really seeing here through your case study of your own lived experience as well, is the way in which at this time, at this archetypal crossroads, this rite of passage, that a lot of material from Psyche that was in the shadows, you know, is there, and you have the opportunity to be able to integrate those things, right? You have the opportunity to allow parts of you to die so other parts of you can be born. You have the opportunity to be able to see and come into relationship with your sacred rage and your victim and your inner hag, your, you know, like these parts that are manipulative in all of us,
yes.
You know, hurt and bitter and victimized,
yes.
to come into relationship with this. And so seeing in the same way that you've spoken of the great opportunity inside the menstrual cycle of just like you can actually have this rite of passage every month where the possibility to do such soulful alchemy is there, that possibility is there. Whether or not that's realized in every woman's menstrual cycle every month, I think we can all agree it's not.
It's not.
It's the possibility is always there. It's always sacred. How many menstrual cycles a year do you feel like you really seize that and you're on this path? And you're like, not all of them, obviously. Some of them I really do, and I bleed so well and I do my good work.
I love it.
Other times I'm just tossed around. Now we talk about menopause. There's this deep opportunity. It's a crisis.
Yes.
Because if you don't die well, if you don't bring these shadows to the fore, if you don't have a look in those dark black mirrors and see, oh, that's me in the mirror. And that's also me. And I do those things too. For me as a man, for you as a woman. This is not gender, the dark mirror, right? It's the unseen, the disowned, the pushed to the back, right? And that comes out covertly in shadowy ways, like a dark witch. Covert, manipulative use of power, right? The dark masculine, right? Or is integrated. These shadowy parts of us are integrated in this crisis that takes place at the midlife point, right? And so what a beautiful opportunity we're seeing here, but what a dangerous opportunity as well. The same with each one of these crossroads.
Yes.
It's very dangerous. What happens in the teenage crossroads? right? And midlife is another sort of teenage point. You're not young, obviously, but you're not old. You're this weird in between at the crossroads, which is where Hecate hangs out, by the way. She lacks the crossroads, right? Yes.
Yes. But this is exactly what we do, either ideally for our teenagers, right? We take them through the rites of passage.
Yes.
To actually show them like, okay, like we are in the crossroads and like this is a good direction to go. And we've got the same opportunities, you know, as a middle-aged women or middle-aged men, just go, well, what is our rite of passage right now? Like, which ways do we want to be pointed right now? And we, in theory, should have more wisdom at this point,
Yes.
and also like seek those roads ourselves because we're meant to be adults right now.
Yes. Yes. In theory, we should have more wisdom.
In theory,
yes. Absolutely.
Yes. And we can get lost also like in this, because when it starts sweeping, and as a woman, I know you've got your own journey, and I would dare to say, and you witness that, like sometimes I get swept in the currents,
yes.
you know, of hormones and stuff. And I'm like, no, I am not in a control right now. Like I am just doing my best to just stay alive.
Yes.
And with all of my work, all of my awareness, you know, and I'm still just like, oh, I'm kind of like all over the place because I'm not, if I'm not drowning,
yes.
well, I'm in a very tough current
yes.
right now. And even with, yeah, as I'm saying, like all my herbs and my work, yes. I can still get swept Absolutely. In there, and it's full on journey, right?
Yeah.
Like, and that's why it is such a rite of passage, and that's why we then emerge on the other side, you know, one way or another of this period of time.
Yes.
Yeah.
I feel like a session like this wouldn't be complete if we didn't speak about Baba Yaga, because Baba Yaga is, you know, yes. You are you love Baba Yaga and you're from the world and the region of Baba Yaga and you hold a bunch of law around that. But I had this one other piece that I jotted down because I did a session in this series called Embracing the Yin about the pause in menopause. And I spoke about the adrenals, and if your adrenals are healthy, then they produce enough estrogen and you don't have all of the terrible physiological symptoms. Yes. But also you're not going to be in a fight or flight state constantly whilst you're going through this transition. You can get more out of it. And so there's this embracing the yin, right? Which is an aspect of one of the many things that menopause is. Embracing the yin in its dark, shadowy, chthonic underworld ways, all sorts of stuff. I was speaking about that in terms of pausing on the kind of way in which you pushed to as an adult, as a female adult, throughout from childbirth, from your like late 20s or 30s, to get the kids to school and to get the career and to pay the mortgage and to do the things. But there's a necessity for a pause, a time out of time inside that, right? So on the one hand, there's that. On the other hand, there's this tragic bind that I want to ask you about. There's also this sense that I hope you're going to like this one. We will see. Is that drawing upon alchemy, Jung, as you've heard me say many times, saw that there's a contrasexual self in each one of us, right? And so inside male identifying person such as myself, then there is a contrasexual self inside me, which is feminine, which is my anima. Yes. And in my midlife, then having been socialized to be aligned with the masculine, the animus, then in the midlife, then I really want to own and come back to the feminine and find my feminine, find my soul, and become more soulful, because I've been on the journey that my society has set. Animus, 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 animus. It's like, so I'm just getting really soulful, really anima, dominant in my midlife. Now, as a woman, according to this theory, Jung's theory, the whole thing, there's only one narrative, it's a mythic narrative, and don't get too caught in it, is that you're socialized to be in the feminine in our generation, in our time, which is the anima. Socialized anima, 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 anima. And then at this point in life, then what's been disowned is this masculine, this animus. And although we don't, it's a terrible reduction to reduce the animus to this, there's one part of that which translates to, I want to make my mark on the world. I want to pick up my career again. I want to get out there and make my name. I want to do these things. I want to climb that mountain. That's the animus, the push towards owning the animus inside the menopausal woman. So let me just bring those things back. Embrace the yin, honor the animus. You're screwed, right? How do you like, do you, I know I'm leading this because I live with you, so I know that push towards, I'm like this, I'm launching my new business, la, 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 all these sorts of things. And that push towards wanting to own that part of yourself because you've been exploring other parts of yourself. And at the same time, the need to just go to the red tent for 3 years and sit down and, carve bones and chant and do hag test business. What do you do with that tragic mind of, I'm going to make my mark and make my business and start my own social enterprise in the world, and I'm going to be successful in that particular definition of success. And it's really time to honor and embrace the yin. Please elucidate, answer it for everybody.
This is how it's done.
Firstly, do you relate to the narrative that I told you about the tragic bind there in between these things?
Yes, I do. And, we spoke about it probably like a few years back when I was, really feeling that change within me. And I didn't know Jung was talking about it, but, when we've been talking, like you've been exploring, because you went through your crisis and you went through it so beautifully, but you've been, exploring your soul so very deeply.
Yes.
And I was just saying at that point, like, well, I've been exploring my feminine and my, my anima. And I feel that I want, to make that mark, and I want to come and harvest more of that solar energy.
Yes.
And I think, like, as, because yes, you are a man and you are socialized to be a man, but of course you do have a soul and you do your soul work. And the same with us as a women, like, we are socialized as a women, but we do want to make our mark in the world, and we want to also like other things other than just doing dishes at home, Ideally, like
not just the dishes, but the soul making.
Yes.
Inside, as opposed to world.
Making the mark in the world.
Yeah, changing the society, changing the world, leaving your mark outside compared to doing. So it's not about dishes or paying bills.
It's not about
it's
dishes
the
at all.
arena of activity there.
Yes.
From out in the world to in. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so this is also potentially controversial, I don't know. But here it comes anyway. If you ask me that kind of a question. Of course, like being in a feminine doesn't mean doing dishes. Like, yes, that's what we often do, but that is absolutely not what we are meant to do. If you are talking about our moon cycles, on menstruation, that is our work, and that is actually that feminine work that we are doing. So yeah, as a man, you're using the solar energy in your like brightest years, to do the mark, and you can still continue to do so. Us as a women, I believe now, and this just took me like so many years to actually come to this point and understanding, because we can harvest and use the solar energy, the moon energy. One, we are processing lots of stuff, through the bleeding and through the moon time, but that is our main work in some way, in that soulful level.
Yes.
It's not necessarily conscious. We don't have to talk about it like,
yes.
This is what's happening.
That's
and
animal.
That's the animal work.
Yes.
And now when I'm coming to the end of that cycle, I am more also looking out to balance the moon and sun energy in a very different ways, because yes, I always wanted to do businesses, and you've seen me start many businesses and fail in many businesses, and yet the business that I kept holding and am holding is my own soul.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm still staying true to that, and I'm building that, and I'm building that, because
Yes.
that is the one what actually makes the most and potentially the biggest mark in a world, without my name attached to it or not. I feel that
Yes.
that my work in a world is important, and I am doing my work.
Yes. Yes.
And yes, I
Yes.
do want to also come more, into the teaching, and be in that sunlight rather than
Yes.
just in the moonlight.
Yes.
Saying that, I know you are also coming more into the moonlight.
Yes.
Because you are also coming, through the different
Yes.
course, but you are more balancing the moon and the solar energy, and so am I.
Yes.
And that's where we can, I think, meet, not only just two of us, but as a world, ideally, when we come to our eldership, and then we can, do the work in a different way. Basically, we are just changed.
Yes.
It's not better or worse. There's absolutely nothing wrong with what's has been happening until now. That's our natural cycle. I believe, you don't believe, it's all good. But right now, like we've got a chance of doing our work in a very different ways.
The alchemical imagery here is that each one of us has the job of marrying the sun and the moon within us. And so in Jung's language, that's that the anima and the animus become integrated, right? Inside us.
Okay.
Right?
Is that what it says?
Yeah.
See, I'm clever.
Drawing from all that alchemical stuff. And yes, you are. Absolutely. And so the outer marriage is fraught with peril, but it's an outer marriage. The inner marriage, the sacred union, the hierogamous, the sacred marriage, is what happens between the masculine and the feminine inside us. And what I notice with a lot of women, from my experience clinically, is that hard menopause equals exhausted adrenals, exhausted yin, exhausted cortisol, dry vagina, dry eyes, dry nervous system, dry skin, hot flushes, the radiators going up, and psyche is over burning and cooking and all that sort of stuff as well. Need those cooling waters. What's got there is trying to keep up with the pace of
solar energy. It's too much solar energy.
Absolutely.
And not enough taking time to use the moon energy.
But but women are their own worst enemy in that time, because like you say, they've internalized the idea, and they're still just like wanting to work at 54 the way they were working at 28, and still haven't yet figured out what that marriage is, so that they can honor the sun in them and honor the moon in them and move in a way that is integrated. But they're not, so that the hard death part is just like, you can't keep going like this. And I'm speaking to you right now. You can't keep going like this. This was good. This was the way. This was how Demeter, or this was how Persephone moved through the world. Demeter is dying in you. Don't keep trying to walk through the world like that. There's a new way to walk through the world. And that death is really, really hard, and it's really hard for everyone. And it happens again and again and again and again throughout life, right? No one has a monopoly on it. We die. And so dying to that other way of being and moving through the world is necessary so that you can birth the hagtess, the elder, the crone, the integrated human that holds the sun in their left hand and the moon in their right hand, right? But this is the movement. And I think that it's, in the end, it's exactly the same work for male identifying bodies and female identifying bodies, but there's a different path around the mountain.
Yeah.
We recognize it's the same, but it's a different kind of journey around there. Yeah. Okay, well, I know I said it wouldn't be complete without Baba Yaga, but I feel like we've reached the end of our time limit on this one. And I'm just going to just dangle that in front of everyone. It's just like so much goodness. Who is this Baba Yaga? What is going on? And where is her accent from? And what is this? What's her culture? What's those strange tattoos on her face? All this stuff about the Baba Yaga. And We're not going to get any of it.
Yes.
So let's leave that there. And maybe there might be a possibility for
Yes.
some other time. Have you got any closing remarks before we just finish this?
Yes, I do have closing remarks.
Great.
Go and read the story of the Baba Yaga. Find it somewhere. You can find, of course, Clarissa Pinkola Estes. She's got it. She's got lots of stories.
Can you say that name again slowly?
Sorry, with the book is called Women Who Run with Wolves. I'm sure most women would actually hear about it, and most of you would read at least a couple of chapters. So somewhere in the second half of the book there is a Baba Yaga story and an explanation. So I highly recommend it for this part of our life.
Yes.
And the complete closing part, come and sit with them more.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And thank you